You could say I'm the kind of woman who finds comfort in order. I like knowing where every dollar goes, not because I'm stingy, but because I've always believed that clarity keeps chaos away. Every Sunday morning, while the world is still stretching and yawning, I sit down with my coffee, open the banking app, and do my little audit. It's my ritual. Quiet, steady, reassuring. But that week, something felt off. There was a withdrawal I didn't recognize. Then another. Not tiny amounts either. These were enough to raise an eyebrow. At first, I thought maybe he'd just forgotten to mention something. An emergency. Maybe a loan to a friend. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I've always trusted him. But the pattern kept repeating, like little red flags waving quietly at the edge of my screen. So I asked him, calmly. No drama. We were in the kitchen, and I remember the way the light from the window hit his face. Soft, almost forgiving. He didn't meet my eyes right away. Just stared down at the floor, took a deep breath, and said, "My dad's really sick. I've been helping with the treatments and meds. I didn't want to worry you." My heart dropped and swelled at the same time. I felt awful for questioning it. His dad had always been kind to me, like a second father. I didn't even hesitate. I wrapped my arms around him and told him he did the right thing. If someone I loved was hurting, I'd do the same. That night, I decided I'd handle the rest of our finances myself. I'd make sure we stayed afloat while he helped his family. He didn't need to carry it alone. For the next few weeks, I barely mentioned the withdrawals. I figured if he needed more, he'd tell me. I tightened our grocery budget, cut back on little luxuries. The wine I liked, the subscriptions we never used. It felt good, honestly. Like I was doing something meaningful. Like we were in this together, facing life's curveballs as a team. That's what marriage is, right? Every time I looked at him, I felt this warm surge of pride. He seemed a little tired, a little distracted, but who wouldn't be? His father was sick, after all. I made sure dinner was ready when he got home. I even packed him snacks for his visits, with little notes tucked inside. "Hang in there," I'd write. "You're doing the right thing." He'd smile when he saw them. At least I thought it was genuine. There were moments when doubt tried to creep in, whispers I pushed away, like when he forgot which hospital his dad was in, or when he said he'd visited him but came home without the usual stories. I brushed it off as stress. Grief makes people scatterbrained, and I wasn't about to be the wife who questioned a man caring for his dying parent. That would have made me cold, suspicious, wrong. So I stayed quiet, supportive, present. I took over the bills, kept a spreadsheet, calculated how long we could stretch our savings if needed. And when I felt a little overwhelmed, I'd remind myself, we were doing this for family, for his father, for something bigger than us. I never imagined I was pouring all that effort into a story I didn't write, and a lie I hadn't seen coming. Looking back now, I think about the small signs I ignored, not just in the bank app, but in his voice, his eyes, the pauses in our conversations. There were nights he'd sit on the edge of the bed longer than usual, just staring at his phone like it held some secret he couldn't share. I told myself it was grief, anxiety, a man trying to be strong for everyone. I wanted so badly to believe that, and I did. I believed every word, every silence, every excuse. I even started researching treatment costs myself, just to better plan our budget. What I found shocked me, prices that didn't match what he was taking out. But instead of confronting him, I doubled down on being supportive. Maybe he was covering things his dad didn't want others to know. Maybe he was protecting someone's dignity. That had to be it. I told myself I was being a good wife, a strong partner. I wore that role like armor, convinced it was shielding us from something worse. And every time I signed off on another grocery list with less than we needed, I reminded myself, this was love. Sacrificial love. The kind that holds a family together when everything else feels like it's falling apart. I didn't realize I was the only one holding on. And I remember the exact thought that ran through my mind that night. The night I moved more money to cover yet another withdrawal. Who lies about their dying father? I believed him. Of course I did. Because you'd have to be a monster to lie about something like that. Right? It had been weeks since that first conversation, and life had settled into this strange rhythm, one part routine, one part waiting. I kept managing our money, kept trusting his silence. But somewhere deep inside me, something had started to itch. It wasn't loud, just persistent, like a draft from a window that had never quite closed. I ignored it until I couldn't anymore. One afternoon, I sat alone at the kitchen table, sorting through receipts, when I realized I hadn't spoken to his father in months. We used to chat often, birthdays, holidays, sometimes just because. And now, suddenly, nothing. I stared at my phone for a long time, my thumb hovering over his name. It felt wrong to call, but even worse, not to. So I dialed, heart pounding like I was doing something I shouldn't. He answered with that familiar warmth, the kind voice that had once told me I was the best thing that ever happened to his son. We exchanged pleasantries, and I asked gently how he was doing. Really doing. He told me about his diagnosis, about how the health plan had kicked in quickly, covering everything. "I've been lucky," he said. "Haven't had to spend a dime. They've taken good care of me." My stomach turned. I kept my voice steady, pretending nothing was out of place. I told him I was just checking in, that we'd been thinking about him. We said goodbye with a smile. He even laughed a little. And when I hung up, my hand was shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down before I dropped it. I sat there for a long time after the call, just staring at nothing. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock. Everything felt louder, sharper. My mind kept circling that one sentence. I haven't had to spend a dime. I wanted to believe I'd misunderstood him. That maybe he meant something else. But there was no mistaking it. His words were clear. And so were the withdrawals. Part of me hoped my husband had just exaggerated. Maybe he was covering small expenses. Gas, food during visits, little things. Maybe he didn't want to burden me. But then I remembered the numbers. Hundreds, sometimes more, disappearing every week. That wasn't lunch money. That wasn't spare change. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel before. Doubt. It sat heavy in my chest, not the kind that makes you panic, the kind that makes you ache. I didn't want to believe he was lying. He was my husband. We'd built a life, built trust. I was the one who always said honesty was our foundation. And now I was starting to question the floor beneath my own feet. It was like realizing the house you live in has cracks you never noticed. Still, I didn't confront him. I didn't say a word when he came home that evening, talking about traffic and meetings like nothing had changed. I smiled, kissed him on the cheek, and served dinner like I always did. But inside, something had shifted. A door had opened, and even though I wasn't ready to walk through it yet, I could feel the cold air leaking in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him, listening to his breathing, steady and unaware. I turned over questions in my head like stones, looking for something smooth to hold on to. Was he lying to protect his father, or protecting himself? And what if... And this was the question I didn't want to ask. What if he wasn't protecting anyone at all? I kept thinking about his eyes that day in the kitchen, how they never really met mine. The way his voice had trembled just enough to sound sincere. It all felt rehearsed now, like a scene he'd practiced before delivering. But why? What would make someone lie about something so... sacred? A sick parent. It was the one thing I never thought he'd use as a shield. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister, not my closest friend. I didn't want their voices in my head yet. I needed to be sure before I spoke the doubt out loud, because once you do that, you can't put it back in. Once suspicion has a name, it starts to grow teeth. And I wasn't ready for what those teeth might tear open. Not yet. But I knew myself. I knew this wouldn't rest. I needed to know what was hiding in the dark. I needed to see it, feel it, name it. Because something wasn't right, and deep down, I already understood that the first crack had just split wide open. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to follow him. That's not how it happened. It was slower than that, like a faucet dripping, one drop then another, until one day I realized I was drowning in what I didn't know. And when you've lived with someone that long, you start to feel the weight of silence louder than words. So I started paying attention. I began with the bank account again, only this time I wasn't just reviewing. I was investigating. I matched withdrawals with dates, times, patterns. Friday evenings were always the same, a large amount gone by 6 p.m. He always said he was visiting his dad on those nights. Always, like clockwork. But the timing didn't sit right. And something in me, that quiet voice I'd silenced for weeks, started whispering louder. I checked his calendar, his appointments, his gas mileage. I told myself I was doing this for clarity, not revenge, not paranoia, just clarity. Because there's a difference between trust and blindness, and I was starting to see how easily one becomes the other. I even started making small notes in my phone. Times, places, things he said. At first it felt invasive, but soon it felt necessary. And then came the night I followed him. My hands were shaking as I got into the car, heart pounding like I was about to do something illegal. I told myself maybe I'd see him at a pharmacy or a hospital parking lot. Maybe he really was just taking a break after visiting his dad. I needed that to be the truth. God, I needed it. But what I saw instead was something else entirely. I parked far enough behind to stay hidden, but close enough to keep eyes on him. He didn't look around. Didn't hesitate, just pulled into the hotel lot like he'd done it 100 times before. And then she stepped out of his passenger seat, like she belonged there. Young, confident. The kind of woman who knows she's being watched and doesn't care. She wore a red coat. Funny, the details that stick. Red, like she wanted to be noticed. Like the universe wanted to slap me with something I couldn't ignore. They laughed as they walked toward the entrance. He had his hand on her lower back. A touch so familiar, so practiced, it made my stomach turn. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just took out my phone and hit record. I zoomed in, framed them in the shot like they were characters in someone else's life, not mine. Part of me felt detached, almost robotic, like I'd stepped outside my body and was watching it all happen to someone else. But another part of me was wide awake, focused. Every step they took into that hotel was burning itself into my memory, into my proof. When the lobby doors closed behind them, I sat in silence. My hands were ice cold, my throat dry. It wasn't just the affair. It was what he used to cover it. The lie about his father. That's what gutted me. That's what turned the betrayal from personal to cruel. He didn't just cheat on me, he turned grief into a costume. And for that, I knew this wouldn't end with just heartbreak. I stayed in the car long after they disappeared inside. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe to feel something stronger. Anger, rage, tears. But all I felt was stillness, like the world had gone flat. I stared at my phone, at the tiny video now saved in my gallery, and thought, this is what the truth looks like. It didn't scream, it whispered. On the drive home, I kept replaying the image of his hand on her back. I'd seen that gesture before, on me, in the early days, at weddings, on vacations. That same touch, now repurposed, recycled, like I was just another version of whatever lie he was selling. But no, not anymore. That woman, the one who forgave, who budgeted, who hugged him through the story about his father, she was gone. When I got home, I plugged my phone in, backed everything up, and labeled the folder with the date. I created a document listing the transactions, the timelines, everything I had gathered. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a reckoning, and I'd show up for it prepared. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't curl into myself the way I once might have. I sat at the edge of the bed and stared at the man sleeping beside me. The man who didn't know I'd seen him choose someone else, who didn't know I'd seen the lie beneath the lie. And in that silence, I made myself a quiet promise. If he wanted to play games with trust, I'd show him what losing really looked like. I didn't rush. That was the first rule I gave myself. No emotional outbursts, no screaming matches, no threats. Just precision. I wanted every move I made to count. So I started gathering everything. Every screenshot, every receipt, every video clip. I created folders, subfolders, timelines. My laptop turned into a war room, and I became my own quiet strategist. Next, I met with a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. It was just me, sitting in a small office with legal pads and quiet clocks ticking on the walls. I laid out the facts: financial fraud, infidelity, emotional deception. I thought I'd feel embarrassed saying it out loud, but instead I felt powerful, like I was finally stepping out of the fog and into my own light. He walked me through the options: how to freeze the accounts, how to protect my assets, how to reclaim what was mine. I left that office later, not happy, not yet, but clear. I went home and without a word locked down every joint account, froze the credit cards, rerouted the auto payments. He didn't even notice. That's how far gone he was. From me, from us, from real life. And then I planned the dinner. Nothing extravagant, just familiar. Family. His father, a few close relatives, people who mattered. People he wouldn't expect to see all at once. I made the invitations warm, casual, kind. He thought it was a bonding moment, a gesture of love, and in a way, it was. Just not the kind he was prepared for. The night of the dinner, I set the table like I always used to. Candles, cloth napkins, the wine his father liked. Everything looked normal, warm, safe. He came home in a good mood, completely unaware, kissed me on the cheek, asked if we had enough dessert. I smiled, told him everything was under control. And in a way it was, just not in the way he imagined. When his father arrived, he looked a little older, a little slower, but still had that quiet dignity about him. I hugged him longer than usual. Not out of guilt, out of respect. He didn't deserve to be part of this, but he needed to know. The others trickled in, laughing, chatting, pouring drinks. My husband basked in the attention, playing host like he always did, like he still believed the show was real. Halfway through dinner, I stood up. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just calmly. I tapped my glass with the back of a fork and said, "I'd like to say something." The room fell into that polite silence families have when they expect a toast. I looked at his father first, held his gaze, then turned to my husband. He was still smiling. Confused, but smiling. That didn't last long. I reached for the folder beside me, placed it on the table like a final course. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "Your son told me he was paying for your treatment. That he'd been helping you, week after week." His father blinked, confused. "But this..." I gestured to the printed screenshots, the withdrawal logs, the hotel photos. "This woman here, she's what the money bought." For a few seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. It was the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels loaded, heavy with realization. His father was the first to speak. "Is this true?" he asked, voice tight and low, as if hoping it wasn't. My husband opened his mouth, but no words came out. Just panic, flickering behind his eyes. That's when I knew. He hadn't seen this coming at all. He tried to fumble through something, said it wasn't what it looked like, that things were complicated. But I didn't let him finish. "Complicated is when someone loses a job and hides it out of shame," I said. "Complicated isn't stealing from your wife and lying about your father's health to cheat." I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than any voice could be. His aunt shook her head. Someone muttered "unbelievable" under their breath. His father pushed back from the table, eyes wet, jaw clenched. The woman who'd raised him, who always defended him, wouldn't even look at him. I stood still, steady. I had already cried in private. This moment wasn't about pain anymore. It was about exposing rot in the light. And as he sat there, silent and cornered, surrounded by the very people he thought would never turn on him, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not victory. Just truth. Standing where lies used to live. And I knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the middle, because the fallout hadn't even started yet. The day after the dinner, I filed for divorce. No hesitation, no dramatic goodbye, just my signature on paper and the cold clarity of a woman done pretending. The lawyer handled everything: spousal support, full financial compensation, and emotional damages for fraudulent use of shared funds. He'd taken what wasn't his. Now I was taking back what was mine. He tried calling, left messages, some angry, some tearful. I didn't answer a single one. There was nothing left to explain. The proof had done all the talking. I wasn't interested in his apologies or the twisted logic he used to justify betrayal. When you lie about something as sacred as family, as illness, it changes the story. It changes you. But I didn't just walk away. I wanted to rewrite the ending. So I made a donation, a large one, to a health charity in his father's name. It was part of the settlement, redirected with intention, and I made it public. A press release, a photo, a quote thanking the man who inspired truth in the face of deception. I didn't mention my husband. I didn't need to. Everyone knew. That gesture hit harder than any insult could have. It spread online. People shared it. Congratulated me. Called it grace. But it wasn't about grace. It was about closure. About turning something rotten into something clean. Something honest. I wanted his father to know he hadn't been used in vain. That from his pain, something decent had been born. He didn't take it well. Word got around fast. The donation, the press release, the fact that the money he used to impress another woman came straight from a lie. I imagine it must have felt like watching a carefully built house collapse, one beam at a time. He tried to do damage control, of course, claimed it was a misunderstanding, that I overreacted. But no one was buying it anymore. And then, just when I thought I'd heard the last of him, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. A woman. Her. She'd found me online, didn't even try to hide it, said she'd just learned the truth about where the money came from, that she didn't sign up to be someone's secret, said she was done with him, that he disgusted her. And then she ended it with one sentence. I hope you burned it all down. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She wasn't my enemy. She was just another thread in a web he spun with the same breath he used to say, I love you. What struck me wasn't her anger. It was her shock. She had no idea he was married. No idea about the money. He hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied to her too. And maybe dozens of others in smaller, quieter ways. People think revenge is loud, that it comes with fire and screaming and broken glass. But the most satisfying kind? It's silent. It's clean. It's watching someone's mask slip off in front of everyone they once fooled, and doing nothing but standing there while it happens. I never wanted to become bitter. That was my biggest fear. That this whole thing, the lies, the betrayal, the humiliation, would turn me into someone hardened and closed off. But it didn't. If anything, it stripped everything down to something honest. I saw what love isn't, what trust shouldn't be. And in the ashes, I found clarity I didn't even know I'd been missing. He lost more than just a wife. He lost the version of himself he performed for the world. And when the curtain dropped, there was nothing behind it but a man with empty hands and no one left to applaud. I heard he moved in with a friend, that he's keeping quiet now, trying to lay low. No wife, no girlfriend, just space and silence. Maybe that's what he needs most. As for me, I started over, slowly. I took time to reclaim the small things, making coffee in the morning without checking 2 mugs, sleeping diagonally across the bed, finding joy in the absence of walking on eggshells. There's something sacred about peace after a storm. It doesn't shout, it just settles in, soft, steady, and finally yours. He lied about sickness to fund betrayal, and in the end, he got exactly what that kind of lie deserves. No dramatic ending, no redemption arc, just the quiet consequence of losing everything. Now he's alone, no wife, no money, no one to lie to but himself.